Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 2 Earth Episode 10, The Library. This one's animated by JM Animation, so the main studio. And yeah, overall excellent episode here, middle of the season. And what this one does that I think is so important for this season, that really makes Book 2 stand out, is that it is really the start of Book 2 having like a lot of extra plot in the middle. And it makes it stand out compared to Book 1, because what Book 1 was lacking was that while each and every episode is like interesting and unique in its own way, it overall lacked a direction toward, like, in that kind of middle, like in that like third quarter of the book, it kind of lacked that direction. It needed, I think, some like a two-parter or something like that that made sense why we haven't just got to the Northern Water Tribe already. Here they do that wonderfully, because they've just got, Toph, Aang's learning earthbending, so that's happening in the background, and they're kind of roughly heading for Ba Sing Se, because it's that has to be the case, because it's ultimately the head of like the rest of the free world, basically. That with the North, recovering after the battle, the Earth King in Ba Sing Se is the main person that they're going to have to deal with if they want to make any sort of counter-strike against the Fire Nation. So they have to kind of, to some degree get involved there to, see what the defense force, I suppose, for the world is actually like. But on their way there, of course, we get this idea that they need information on the Fire Nation, that Team Avatar fundamentally knows very little about the Fire Nation. They don't have a map, they don't know the full layout of it, and they're not finding a lot of information anywhere as well. So Sokka wants information, and that's one of the key things that they do here. That even though they're having these kind of mini vacations at the moment, Sokka really wants to kind of get down to business on his. So what they do here is they seemingly randomly just kind of go to this Misty Palms Oasis, which is Katara's vacation. And it's meant to be this really relaxing place, but it turns out that in the few years with the war on, this place has gone downhill. It isn't the natural hotspot it used to be, and is kind of a pretty tough town with lots of sandbenders outside. But they go inside one place, and we meet Professor Zay, who's the one of the key new characters here presented, and he is the head of anthropology at Ba Sing Se University. And because of that, he takes great interest in Aang, and then later, of course, Appa, but not Momo for some reason, which I thought was interesting. But of course, Air Nomad, Sky Bison, that it fits why those would be the two things to stand out. And his life's work basically has been devoted towards this library, the legends about Wan Shi Tong's library, somewhere in the Siwang Desert, and he's been searching for this for a while now. And Sokka immediately takes interest in this, knowing that this library is so legendary that it is said to basically have, like, to some degree, a compilation of knowledge from, like, the entire history of humans to a degree. We get some interesting information in that Zay kind of implies that, the library, according to legend, was built by spirits, Wan Shi Tong and the knowledge seekers, and they collect books from across the world, and that's why Sokka wants to go. The fact that they are the ones who technically built the library, I find very, very interesting, because while I think like later on it's kind of established that, okay, like spirits, they're not just, it's not that they just have no creativity, that they can't ever build anything or anything like that. It still, I think, is a little bit of a like, I hope that, is that just part of the legend that, it's said that they built it, or is it kind of more of a case where Wan Shi Tong and the knowledge seekers kind of ended up taking over a tower, a library, this kind of building that other people built, and they kind of just took it over as, a library. Because I think there's an interesting story to Wan Shi Tong in terms of, like, he is known as the knowledge spirit, and that's kind of the way we have to classify spirits, because we fundamentally don't know much about, like, the culture of the spirit world in terms of, like, how spirits really interact with each other for the most part, what their goals and aims are, because it's not that you can really classify them as like a race of like a species like humans, where like you have these kind of groups and like settlements, and there's always this kind of progression of like technology. Spirits for the most part are kind of fairly stagnant. That's something we know about them, is that they don't actively develop technology. That's why the idea that they built the library is actually this kind of like, wait, does that even fit? But if it is just like an old building, it's not too far in terms of advancement. But it's always this thing with spirits of just, we fundamentally don't know what they're really about, in that it seems like they shouldn't care about the physical world, but they fundamentally do. In that Wan Shi Tong, as the knowledge spirit, most of the knowledge he's kind of taking on board is human knowledge. I think very little of the knowledge that he kind of has is, as such stuff about spirits. I assume he knows most of what's going on in the spirit world. Like, he probably like a character like Ko probably knows like any spirit who's taken on a human form, the location of like where each spirit is, that sort of thing. But I think fundamentally there's probably not this grand history, this kind of like knowledge of all these techniques and stuff like that about the spirits like there is with humans. I think that's part of like the unique aspect of Wan Shi Tong, in that he's compiling knowledge, but most of it is knowledge about humans. But then he himself develops this dislike of humans himself, because of experiences like with Zhao and then with Team Avatar in this episode, to the point where he's very, very anti-humans and doesn't really care about them at all when we meet him again in Korra with Unalaq. And I think it speaks again that there probably is a greater story here than just whatever Zhao potentially did, and that I'm not entirely sure we're meant to interpret it as just like, when Zhao went there, he took the information that was going to potentially hurt the spirits, in that the information from Wan Shi Tong's library is basically what led to, the moon spirit needing to be a different person now. The death temporarily of one of the great spirits. So that's one of the reasons he's probably angry. But I'm not sure if we're meant to imply that Zhao and his group just destroyed the Fire Nation wing of the library. Like, I'd almost want to interpret it as that's more of a kind of older thing, that's more of a Sozin era thing, because that's what he did. He basically very much hid away Fire Nation history prior to himself, and basically made it just, this is how things are going forward, and it's all about this current line of Fire Lords, and the history before him is kind of not really that well known at this point. And I'd like to think that's a very similar thing here, that he probably also, maybe sent out people to Wan Shi Tong's library, or was maybe discovered at a later point, and then that information was wiped out. Because I assume it's almost like to the point where like even like a character like a Zhao probably isn't aware of the history of the Fire Nation, and so if he came across the true history of the Fire Nation, why would he want to just destroy it? That's one of those interesting things. But yeah, we eventually find the library. It's actually, for the most part, buried completely in the desert. All that's sticking out is one tower. And Toph reveals that it's actually all there intact. It's just buried under sand. Clearly no one's been to it in a while. And so they head in. Toph and Appa stay outside, which is an important plot point. And what we get in here is obviously the meeting Wan Shi Tong for the first time. And, as much as he doesn't like humans and he's quite standoffish, he still is reasonable at this point in time, in that they eventually manage to convince him to let them look around, as long as they supply a new piece of knowledge to his library. So Zay, being a professor, supplies basically, a research paper in the form of this book that he's written. Katara gives one of the waterbending scrolls. Aang gives a wanted poster of himself as an avatar, a famous person. Of course, that's something like note that he existed, adding to the library. That's a good thing, and Asaka gives a special type of knot. All forms of knowledge, but he doesn't really like the knot that much. But he lets them all in to look around with the idea that the one thing they said to say to him is that we will not use any of the knowledge we get from the library for like ill will. That it's kind of meant to just be, I'll let you look around, knowledge for knowledge's sake, don't use any of it. Because his interpretation of humans is that they only use information, they only want information to get that information to destroy other people and get an advantage over other people. That's what Zhao did, that's what everyone he's encountered recently has, and fundamentally it's what our group wants to do. And there's this sense that, like, I think Wan Shi Tong has sort of lost sight of, like, any sort of perspective on human affairs, in that even his knowledge seekers, I think we're meant to interpret the fact that the knowledge seekers lead the team to the kind of planetarium to get the information on the eclipse. The reason they do that is because I think they get that for, like, the fate of the world and everything going forward, knowledge, it is a good thing that they guide these people to the knowledge about how to defeat the Fire Nation, whereas Wan Shi Tong very much takes this kind of very principled stance of, like, no, even if you think it's for a good cause, I'm not going to let you do that, because knowledge is this pure thing. So I'd like to know a little bit more about him, like the specific events that led to him becoming this way. Of course, this is when they find out, the main thing they find out is that Sokka finds this note about the darkest day in Fire Nation history. It's one of the few little scraps of information left about the Fire Nation, because they find that the Fire Nation section of the library has been destroyed, and that's where they get the help about from the Fox Spirits. And they later find out that it is an eclipse. An eclipse, of course, is the darkest day in Fire Nation history, and they quickly figure out that that means that firebenders lose their bending during an eclipse, just like a solar eclipse of the moon is why waterbenders lose their bending abilities as well. So this is where they come up with the idea of this, like, with this information in mind, if there is another eclipse coming up, that is the perfect time to strike back, because all of a sudden the Fire Nation lose all of their power and they're defenseless for a while, and that's a good chance that they have with an advantage. And this is where Wan Shi Tong comes back in and obviously hates the fact that they plan to use the knowledge to actually take out the Fire Nation. And this is where the whole idea of him not caring about the details of what's happening here, but it's this weird dynamic of, like, he's completely unwilling to give his knowledge to other humans to kind of, in a way, like, shape history going forward, but is very willing to, like, take anything in that adds to history. So it's, like, very much that idea of just, for him, it is really a case of just, he loves knowledge so much that it really is just for knowledge's sake. That as the knowledge spirit, he just cares about having more things that he knows. And then they go back to the planetarium and basically do predictions. They go ahead to the dates that haven't happened yet between now and Sozin's Comet, and they find out when the next solar eclipse is. And they find out that there's one in a couple of months, pretty much just prior to Sozin's Comet actually coming, and this is the time, the date that's going to really help things. And they plan to bring this information to the Earth King and form a plan of attack to actually defeat the Fire Nation. So huge plot reveal here, definitely. Some other things in the library we get are seemingly random, but actually becomes quite important in the end. Aang finds a kind of a picture of a lion turtle and makes a note about it. But in the picture, you can clearly see that it's a lion turtle talking to what looks just to be a human, but I think it looks like it's meant to be like an avatar. So it's clearly an early kind of tease of the fact that there's, like, a connection between the lion turtles and humans, and just kind of lion turtles and avatar, setting up the whole energy bending thing, setting up what the lion turtle in the end says about, like, humans and bending abilities and prior to the avatar and stuff like that. So it's a pretty interesting stuff here, and I think there's just this idea that, like, if Aang had rooted around that general area a little bit more, we could have got some very important stuff here, like, just go around the corner and you get the information about the Tree of Time and stuff like that, and there's all the information of the Avatar world is, like, right there. It's really interesting. And that I'd love to just look around that place, just as someone who loves the lore of the universe so much. But yeah, that's that stuff. Then we get on the outside, of course, Toph and Appa, and we get that they're just kind of, like, you were seeing the little interactions between them, that there's kind of a awkwardness between them and stuff like that. But the big thing is that the library, obviously, Wan Shi Tong makes the decision that he's taking the library back to the spirit world. He doesn't want humans to use the knowledge that he has ever again. So he's bringing it back to the spirit world, and so he begins to effectively like suck the library under the sand even more, so it will eventually go into the spirit world. And then on the outside, Toph notices this and has to use her earthbending to basically hold up the library more. And because the only entrance technically in and out back to the desert is the like little windows that they climbed into at the start. And so she holds it up. She's struggling. She has to put all her effort in to even hold it up. Even then, it's still slowly going down. But then the big, problem for her comes into play when sandbenders arrive and plan to basically take Appa. And she's stuck in this decision between, does she stop, potentially fight off the sandbenders, and let her friends potentially remain trapped under sand or sucked into the spirit world? She doesn't obviously know what's exactly happening. Or does she kind of force herself to just let Appa be captured and hold the library up until they get out? And I think she tries to do both, and I think she can absolutely sense that even if she tried as hard as possible, turned around, let the library sink, I don't think she had the confidence that she could take on sandbenders, that many sandbenders, and win. Because I think they very much made the point of her really, really struggling to adapt to walking on sand. And even though she could ultimately bend sand, she had no sense of really where everyone was, so she was inaccurate, and she couldn't really do her usual power moves. So she was at a little bit of a disadvantage here. So my interpretation has always been that she made the right decision to, help her friends get out and, save who she could, because I think if she had tried to fight the Sandbender, she probably would have ended up losing that fight, as powerful as she is. At this stage in her knowledge of sandbending, I think she would have lost to that many Sandbenders who are completely, used to, bending sand and in that environment. So it leads, of course, to everyone escaping. They think it's like the big positive. They finally got the weakness of the Fire Nation, an eclipse, a way to defeat them. It should be all positive on the way to Ba Sing Se, but everyone gets out. Appa's taken. Toph is very upset about the situation, which I quite like in that it's in like the chase, and even at the start of this episode, you get that awkwardness between Appa and Toph, and that like, do they really like each other? But she knows how important of a member of the group he is, and she herself is upset that he's gone. But she knows that like she was the one left out here with Appa to kind of look after him, and she's kind of failed at this point and doesn't really know what to say to everyone when they get out. Of course, she obviously explains to them what happened, and everyone understands that there was very little she could do. They would have been gone if she didn't hold up the library, but just Aang starting to cry at the end, because for him, it's the potential loss of like one of the only things left from his era. It's him and Appa and Bumi is like all that's left from his era, and now his best friend is gone basically. And it presents this amazing kind of other plot point going into the rest of the series of like, now okay, we were heading to Ba Sing Se kind of anyway, more or less. That was the assumption. Now they have this information to plan an attack against the Fire Nation, which is this really important piece of information that makes them going to the Earth King much more like, oh, they actually have something to present to him. But now there's this other thing of like, now they don't have the really quick transport that they used to have. They're going to have to like walk the rest of the way to Ba Sing Se. They're going to be really slow in terms of traveling. And then in this case, they're stuck in the middle of a desert. That's the other thing that sets up the next episode exactly. They're pretty much right in the middle of a desert. No way to get out really easily. And they don't really seem to have supplies with them because most of them are with Appa. So straight away, huge problems for the team just presented with this in terms of travel. And then how on earth are they ever going to get Appa back? Because, we don't really know where the Sandbenders are taking him and so on. So really good episode in terms of, I think the big thing that this does is it immediately makes the book so much more complex in terms of the plot. So many dynamics happening. And then on the other side of things, like Zuko's still in play wherever he and Iroh are going now that they're back together. Azula's still out there with probably another plan to put into play. and so on. So really, really great stuff, and this is an excellent episode. So that's been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the episode, as well as what I had to say about it here. But yeah, that's been the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.